We've all heard the saying, let go and let God. Unfortunately, if you're a Christian with obsessive compulsive disorder, this is really hard to do. However, it's not impossible to do, and so this morning in our devotional, I would like to share with you a few thoughts on how we can begin letting go. My name is Jamie Eckert, and I share biblical content for Christians who are struggling with doubt, obsessions, and anxiety. And this morning's devotional will be about letting go. What does it actually mean to let go? Well, letting go involves a release of responsibility, of giving over and transferring responsibility to God for something that I formerly claimed as my own responsibility. Something that I was taking the responsibility to figure out, to solve, to fix, to find a sense of closure, okay? Letting go leans into that uncertainty of not knowing when or how that closure is going to come, but giving that over and trusting that God is going to be the one to fix this problem for me. In today's devotional, the verse that I would like us to look at is one from 1 Peter 5, verse 6 and 7. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. So let's pull this passage apart and look at how each aspect in this verse applies to our case and can help us begin releasing our anxieties into God's hands. Probably the part of the verse that you're most familiar with is the part that says to cast your cares on him or cast your anxieties on him because he cares for you. That's usually the part that we quote, but in order to understand how to do that, we need to look at the verse that comes before. And that verse says, it begins by saying, to humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Now, this is not meant to be a scary part of the passage. What it means to say is that before I can have that experience of casting my cares on him, I need to humble myself. I need to come to the realization that what I've been doing is not working. And I'm doing the same thing over and over again, trying to solve my problems, and it's not getting me where I need to go. I'm not doing something right. Maybe I need to come to God and humble myself and say, Lord, I've reached the end of my rope. I can't keep doing this. So our experience of being able to cast our care on God, it must begin with the humbleness, the humility part of recognizing that I need a power greater than myself to solve this problem. But the verse doesn't leave us there. It says to humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. So this experience of humbling ourselves before God, this is not a self-deprecating or self-hating sort of thing. We're not to be flogging ourselves or bleeding or rolling in the thorns. This is an experience of humbling ourselves with the recognition that it is for my best good. And that's why it says that he will exalt you in due time. So humbling yourself does not mean humiliation in the negative sense of the term. That when we humble ourselves before God and just express to him and to ourselves that we've reached the end of our rope and we need help, this is actually the genesis, the birth of true spiritual growth. This is the beginning of a very positive part of our spiritual journey. Now we get to the meat and the potatoes of this verse, where it says, casting all your cares on him. This is the part that gets really tricky for those of us that maybe have a chronic anxiety disorder and we struggle to be able to do this consistently. But casting all our care on him, what does that mean? It means that I take this topic, whatever the topic is that I'm nervous and anxious about, and I transfer that to God. I say, here, God, this is yours. I need to give this to you. And I give it to him. That part is easy. It's easy to give it to God. But the problem is leaving it with God. We give it to him, but we immediately want to take it back. And you just ask yourself, what's your typical range of time? Do you give it to God for 30 seconds, for 5 minutes, for half a day, for the full day before we take it back? I'm not talking to you from a pedestal. This is my struggle too, that I can easily give things to God. The problem is being able to leave it with him. But this idea to cast my care on God is that I'm going to give it to God, and then I'm going to go through this process throughout my entire day of refusing over and over and over again to take it back. My anxiety is going to come barking in my ear saying, hey, God hasn't solved it yet. You don't have closure yet. You don't know how this is going to turn out. You don't even know what path it's going to take in order for it to be solved. There are so many unknowns in this problem. And sometimes we're talking big problems. Sometimes we're talking catastrophic things that we're worried about. One of the most common ones in the world of religious OCD is worrying about if I'm really saved or not. These are huge things that we're worried about. But if I decide to give that to the Lord, then I need to go through the process of daily, moment by moment, refusing to take back what I've cast upon the Lord. One technique that many people find very helpful is to intentionally get up after our prayer and do the next thing. If you have a dog that needs to be walked, go walk the dog. If you have dirty dishes in the kitchen sink, go wash the dirty dishes. You need to call your mother-in-law, go call your mother-in-law. Whatever it is that needs to be done next, going and doing the next thing to focus our minds on something productive and something intentional, this can help us start to just flip that switch away from the rumination cycle back into real life, trying to get busy doing things that are actually useful and leaving that issue with the Lord. Now, many people struggle with this concept of letting go and letting God because there's something within us that boils up and says, wait, you can't give it to God because it's your responsibility. A lot of people will say, Jamie, I get it. We need to cast our cares on the Lord for everything that He promised to do. But there's also things that I'm supposed to do, things that I'm responsible for that God's not going to step in and do. So I better do it. And I will say, yes, absolutely. If it is something that God asked you to do, we need to do it. However, I will just remind you that my devotionals are being pointed towards individuals that struggle with anxiety and more particularly religious anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. So with that being said, I know my audience very well. I've talked to hundreds of people with scrupulosity, and here's what I will say. 9 times out of 10, the individual with scrupulosity thinks that it's their responsibility when it's not. And I'll give you an example here. Example A and example B. In one case, we've got somebody who really does have something that they're responsible for doing. Let's say a guy is cheating on his wife. God has convicted him and he knows he needs to call off the relationship and stop it. God's not going to do that action for that person. He's not going to, in most cases, he's not going to intervene. That person has a responsibility to do righteousness and justice in his life. And then there's, maybe other things that he'll need to do, to repent, to talk to his wife, and so on. In a very black and white case like that, you can see clearly that yes, God is convicting you to do something and it's your action, it's your move on the chessboard. But then let's come to the 9 cases out of 10 of people that I talk with. I would probably say even more than 9, like 9.7 out of 10. In the obsessive compulsive disorder community, typically these are things that we feel like we need to hold on to and we need to take responsibility for. We're a little bit going to extremes. For example, somebody who is repenting of a sin and they've done their part to make restitution and to change their ways, but they're hung up on asking God to forgive them. And they've asked God 101 times to forgive this particular sin. And they can't let go of the need to ask 102 times. This would definitely be an example where we can see, look, God promised to forgive you. And when we continue holding on to the responsibility that I need to do something in order to be forgiven, I need to do something to make sure I'm saved, we can clearly see that this is crossing the line of me trying to take God's responsibility, me trying to take His role and fix my own problems. So the last part of the passage that really gives me the comfort and the reassurance that I need in order to cast my cares effectively on God, the last part says, "For He cares for you." This is that spiritual and existential little capstone that gives me this flood of emotional assurance of knowing that I can cast my care on Him because He cares for me. Because He loves me and He's never gonna let me slip out of His hand. He's never gonna let something happen to me that is not in His will. God loves me, He cares for me. And let's just imagine for a moment, let's just imagine hypothetically that I get off course. In my sincere desire to follow God and to understand what righteousness by faith actually means. Like I'm sincerely trying to give God what he said is his, and I take what is supposed to be my responsibility. I'm sincerely trying to figure this out. And let's just hypothetically imagine that I get some of the details wrong, that I give him something that I was actually supposed to do. He cares for me. He loves me. Doesn't it make sense that he would come and initiate some sort of reconciliation process, some kind of like, hey Jamie, let's fix this. You got the details wrong. Think about Jonah. Jonah was intentionally running away from the Lord. He was like sincerely in his heart trying to disobey God. And God redirected him. God turned him around and brought him back to where he was supposed to be and gave him all of these character growth experiences that helped him have a change of heart. Would he not do so much more for me if I am sincerely trying to follow him and I am sincerely trying to overcome this spiritual anxiety and I'm trying to give him and cast my cares on him and transfer responsibility to him so that I can overcome my anxiety? Would he not so much more? If he did it for Jonah, who was blatantly going against him, would he not also redirect me if I was accidentally making a mistake? We need to trust the heart of our Father, that he cares for us. I can cast my care on him because he cares for me. And that even if I'm making a mistake in this whole process, trusting the redirect, trusting that he is going to guide me back to where I need to be securely in his will. Today, when anxiety knocks on your door and tries to get you tinkering with all the different ruminations and fears and worries, I would encourage you to take that and give it to God, to cast your care on him, remembering that he loves you and he cares for you. And he's the one that had this idea in the first place. He's the one that came up with the idea of, hey, you can't handle that, but I can. So why don't you come and give it to me? I believe if we do this, we're going to find so much relief and such a soothing experience in God's rest and peace by giving to him what he promised to carry. So I encourage you to do that today, to give your cares to him, and then immediately switch to intentional tasks. Go do the next thing that you know you're supposed to do. And I do believe that God will respond to your faith and give you the comfort that you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate that you came to the devotional. I'll see you back here next week.